The Chicago arena was a sea of pulsing energy. A sold-out crowd of 25,000 fans screaming, their hands raised high, leather jackets and studded wristbands glinting under the kaleidoscope of stage lights. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness himself, stood at the center of it all, his voice a raw, electrifying force tearing through the opening riffs of Crazy Train. The band was tight, the drums thundering like a storm, the guitars slicing the air with razor-sharp precision. Ozzy, clad in his signature black leather pants and a tattered shirt that seemed to defy gravity, prowled the stage with the manic energy that had made him a legend. His wild mane of hair whipped around as he leaned into the microphone, belting out the iconic lyrics, "All aboard!" The crowd roared back, a tidal wave of devotion washing over him. It was a night like any other in his decades-long career, a chaotic symphony of sound and sweat, the kind of night where Ozzy felt invincible, untouchable, a god of rock commanding his faithful. The set list had already burned through Iron Man and War Pigs, each song stoking the audience's frenzy to new heights. Now, deep into Crazy Train, Ozzy was in his element, his eyes scanning the crowd as they always did, connecting with the faces that adored him. Kids in their teens, grizzled metalheads who'd been with him since the Black Sabbath days, and everyone in between. He thrived on those fleeting moments of eye contact, the way a fan's face would light up when they realized the Prince of Darkness was looking right at them. But tonight, something was different. Something stopped him dead in his tracks. It was in the middle of the second verse, the band locked into a blistering groove, when Ozzy's gaze landed on a woman in the middle section, row 30, seat 12. She wasn't screaming or jumping like the others around her. She stood still, almost eerily so, her hands clutching the edges of an old, weathered leather jacket that looked like it had survived a war. Pinned to the lapel was a small, tarnished badge, a circular emblem with a faded skull and crossbones, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. But Ozzy saw it, and the sight hit him like a freight train. His voice faltered mid-lyric, the words, "mental wounds still screaming," catching in his throat. The band, sensing the shift, kept playing for a few bars, but the drummer, Tommy, shot a glance at the guitarist, Mick, their eyes wide with confusion. Ozzy had never stopped a song before, not like this. He held up a hand, his rings glinting under the stage lights, and the music screeched to a halt, the guitars fading into a dissonant hum, the drums stuttering into silence. The crowd's roar dulled to a murmur, 25,000 voices whispering in bewilderment. Was this part of the show? Was something wrong? Ozzy stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on the woman in row 30. His hand, trembling slightly, pointed directly at her, the microphone still clutched in his grip. "Stop the music," he said, his voice rough but commanding, carrying through the arena's speakers like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. The woman in the leather jacket looked up, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock as she pointed to herself, as if to say, "Me?" Ozzy's head of security, Jack Iron Thompson, was already moving, his massive frame cutting through the stage crew like a bulldozer. Jack had seen it all in his years with Ozzy, drunken fans rushing the stage, fights breaking out in the pit, even the occasional protester trying to make a statement. But this was new. Ozzy's face wasn't angry or alarmed. It was something else, something Jack had never seen before. It was like the man had seen a ghost. "Jack," Ozzy said into the mic, his voice shaking now, "get that woman in row 30, middle section, seat 12. Bring her backstage. Now!" Jack hesitated for a split second, his instincts screaming that this could be a security nightmare. Was she a threat? A stalker? Someone from Ozzy's past he didn't want to deal with in front of 25,000 people? But Ozzy's tone left no room for questions. Jack nodded, signaling to his team, and 3 security guards began weaving through the crowd toward row 30. The audience was buzzing now, a low hum of confusion and curiosity rippling through the arena. Some fans craned their necks to see who Ozzy was pointing at. Others whispered to their friends, speculating wildly. Was this a stunt? A surprise guest? Or was something seriously wrong? The woman, who would later introduce herself as Emily Harper, stood rooted to the spot, her hands still gripping the edges of her leather jacket. She was in her late 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face etched with lines that spoke of a hard life. The badge on her jacket gleamed faintly under the arena lights, its skull and crossbones design worn but unmistakable. Emily's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear the murmurs of the crowd around her. She'd come to this concert alone, a rare night out after years of scraping by, a chance to lose herself in the music that had carried her through her darkest days. She'd saved for months to afford the ticket, a seat in row 30, not too close, but close enough to feel the raw power of Ozzy's voice. She'd never expected to be noticed, let alone singled out by the man himself. As the security guards approached, their black shirts emblazoned with "Staff" in bold letters, Emily felt a wave of panic. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice calm but firm, "Mr. Osbourne would like to speak with you. Please, come with us." Emily's knees felt weak, her mind racing. What could Ozzy Osbourne possibly want with her? She glanced around, hoping there was some mistake, but the guards were looking right at her, their expressions unreadable. The woman next to her, a young fan with purple hair and a Black Sabbath tattoo, grabbed her arm. "Oh my God, what's happening? Do you know him?" Emily shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I don't. I swear." As the guards escorted Emily through the crowd, parting the sea of curious faces, Ozzy stood on stage, his eyes following her every step. The audience was growing restless now, some cheering, others shouting questions, but Ozzy didn't seem to hear them. He turned to the crowd, his face a mix of determination and something softer, something vulnerable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his Birmingham accent thick with emotion, "I need you to bear with me for a minute. Something important just happened, and I've got to take care of it. This ain't part of the show, but it's real, and it matters more than any song I could sing tonight. Give me a few minutes, and I'll be back." The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and confusion, some clapping in support, others muttering in frustration. Ozzy didn't wait for their reaction. He turned and strode off stage, his boots echoing on the metal platform, leaving the band standing awkwardly under the lights. Tommy, the drummer, started a slow beat to keep the energy alive, but it was clear no one knew what was happening. Backstage, the crew was in chaos, stage hands whispering, managers barking orders into headsets, trying to figure out what had possessed Ozzy to stop a show in its prime. Emily was led through a maze of corridors, the roar of the crowd fading behind her as the guards ushered her toward a heavy black door marked VIP. Her hands were shaking now, the leather jacket feeling heavier than ever. She'd worn it to every concert she'd ever been to. A talisman of sorts, a piece of her past she couldn't let go of. The badge pinned to the lapel was her brother's, a relic from a time when he'd been alive, when music had been his lifeline. She had no idea why it had caught Ozzy's eye, but the look on his face, part shock, part recognition, had sent a chill down her spine. As the door swung open, she saw him standing there, Ozzy Osbourne, larger than life, yet somehow smaller in this dimly lit room, his stage persona stripped away. His eyes were red, his hands fidgeting with the cross necklace he always wore. "It's you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That jacket, that badge, I know it." Emily stared at him, her throat tight, unable to form words. Ozzy stepped closer, his gaze locked on the badge, and for a moment, it was as if the world had stopped spinning. "That's Danny's," he said, his voice breaking. "Danny Sullivan's. How the hell do you have it?" Emily's breath caught in her chest. Danny Sullivan. Her brother. The name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, not since the night he didn't come home. She looked into Ozzy's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Pain, raw and unguarded. The kind of pain that comes from carrying a wound for too long. "Danny was my brother," she said finally, her voice trembling. "This was his jacket." "How do you know him?" Ozzy's face crumpled, and he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus," he muttered, pacing the small room. "After all these years." Jack, the security chief, stood by the door, his arms crossed, watching the exchange with growing unease. He'd seen Ozzy in every state, drunk, high, furious, ecstatic, but never like this, never so undone. The badge, the jacket, the name, it was all connected to something Jack didn't understand. Something from Ozzy's past that had surfaced in the middle of a sold-out show. The air in the room was thick with tension, the weight of unspoken stories pressing down on everyone. Ozzy turned back to Emily, his eyes searching her face. "I need to know everything," he said. "About Danny, about that jacket, about you." Emily nodded, her heart pounding, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. The door to the past had been flung open, and there was no going back. The backstage room was a stark contrast to the electric chaos of the Chicago Arena's main stage, its walls lined with faded posters of past concerts, and a single flickering fluorescent light casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and stale coffee, a gritty reminder of the countless nights spent in places like this, where the glamour of rock and roll gave way to raw, unfiltered reality. Ozzy Osbourne stood in the center of the room, his black leather pants creaking as he shifted his weight, his eyes fixed on Emily Harper. She sat on a worn folding chair, her hands clutching the edges of the leather jacket, the skull and crossbones badge glinting faintly under the harsh light. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the muffled thump of the crowd's impatient stomping filtering through the walls. Jack "Iron" Thompson, Ozzy's head of security, leaned against the door, his arms crossed, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes darted between Ozzy and Emily, trying to piece together what was happening. The rest of the security team had been sent back to the stage to keep the crowd calm, but Jack stayed, sensing that whatever was unfolding here was bigger than a simple fan interaction. Emily's heart was racing, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She'd come to the concert to lose herself in the music, not to be dragged backstage by the Prince of Darkness himself, confronted with questions about her brother. Danny Sullivan, a name she'd buried deep in her heart for 2 decades. Ozzy's voice, rough and laced with emotion, cut through the silence. "That jacket," he said, pointing a trembling finger at the worn leather draped over Emily's shoulders. "It's Danny's. I'd know it anywhere. That badge. He made it himself, didn't he? Back in '73, when he was working with us?" Emily nodded slowly, her throat tight, unable to trust her voice just yet. Ozzy stepped closer, his eyes searching the jacket, And then he saw it. A faint, handwritten inscription on the inside of the collar, barely legible after years of wear. If lost, return to Danny Sullivan, Black Sabbath roadie. Ozzy's breath hitched, and he ran a hand through his tangled hair, muttering to himself, "Christ, it's really you." Emily finally found her voice, though it came out shaky, barely above a whisper. "Danny was my older brother. He gave me this jacket before he died. He said it was his lucky charm, that it had seen him through every show he worked with you guys. I wear it to every concert, to keep him close." Her fingers traced the badge, the metal cool against her skin, and her eyes welled up as memories of Danny flooded back. His lopsided grin, his endless stories about life on the road, the way he'd play Black Sabbath records on their old turntable and pretend he was part of the band. Ozzy sank into a chair across from her, his face pale, his hands fidgeting with the cross necklace that hung around his neck. "Danny Sullivan," he said, almost to himself, his voice thick with a mix of awe and pain. "He was one of us, you know? Not just a roadie. He was family. He kept us together when things were falling apart. And he—" Ozzy's voice broke, and he looked away, his jaw tight. "He saved my life once, literally, and I never got to thank him." Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching in her chest. "Saved your life? What do you mean?" Ozzy leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and for a moment he wasn't the larger-than-life rock star, but a man haunted by a debt he could never repay. "It was 1973, Ozzy began, his voice low and steady, as if pulling the memory from a locked vault. Black Sabbath was on tour in the States, playing a string of shows that were as chaotic as they were legendary. The band was at the height of their early fame, but behind the scenes, they were a mess. Drugs, booze, egos clashing like cymbals. Danny Sullivan was their roadie, a wiry kid from Birmingham, Alabama, with a quick laugh and a knack for fixing anything, from busted amps to broken spirits. He wasn't just there to haul gear. He was the guy who kept the show running when everyone else was too strung out to care. One night, in a rundown venue in Detroit, the stage rigging was a disaster. Cheap, poorly installed, a death trap waiting to happen. Ozzy was in the middle of Paranoid, jumping around like a madman, when Danny noticed a lighting truss starting to give way right above the stage. Without a second thought, he sprinted across the catwalk, shoving a stagehand out of the way, and grabbed the falling truss with his bare hands, holding it long enough for Ozzy to move out of danger. The truss came down seconds later, crashing onto the stage, missing Ozzy by inches. "He could have died up there," Ozzy said, his voice raw. "He didn't even hesitate, just ran straight into it, saved my life, and all he said afterward was, 'You owe me a beer, mate.'" Ozzy laughed, but it was a hollow sound, tinged with regret. "I never bought him that beer. Never got the chance." Emily listened, her hands trembling as she clutched the jacket tighter. She'd heard bits and pieces of Danny's life on the road, but he'd never told her about that night. He wasn't the type to brag about heroics. He'd always downplayed his role, saying he was just lugging gear for the loudest band on earth. But the jacket, the badge, they were proof of who he was, what he'd meant to the people around him. "He loved working with you," Emily said, her voice breaking. "He used to call home and tell me stories about the shows, about you and Tony and Geezer and Bill. He said you were like brothers to him, even if you didn't know it. That badge, he made it one night when he was bored. Said it was his way of claiming a piece of the band." She paused, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of the jacket. "When he died, this was all I had left of him. The police gave it to me with his things. I didn't even know why he'd kept it so close, but I couldn't let it go. Ozzy's eyes were red now, his hands clenched into fists. "How did he die?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "I heard it was an accident, but no one told me the details. I was in a bad place back then, barely keeping myself together. By the time I found out, it was too late to do anything." Emily took a deep breath, the memory of that night cutting through her like a knife. "It was after one of your shows," she said, "in '75. You were playing in Memphis, and Danny was there, working the crew like always. He was driving back to his hotel after the show, late at night. It was raining and the roads were slick. A truck lost control, crossed the median, and hit his car head-on. He didn't stand a chance." Her voice cracked, and she looked down at the badge, her fingers tracing the skull and crossbones. "The police said he was gone before the paramedics got there. They found this jacket in the passenger seat, like he'd been holding on to it. I've worn it ever since, to every concert, every place that felt like it could bring me closer to him." Ozzy leaned back, his face a mask of grief and guilt. "I should have been there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have checked on him, made sure he was okay. He was always looking out for us. And I let him down." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't let him down, Ozzy. He loved what he did. He loved being part of your world. This jacket, this badge, they were his pride. He wouldn't have wanted you to carry that guilt." The room fell silent again, the weight of their shared loss filling the space between them. Jack, still standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably, his usual stoic demeanor cracking as he listened to the story. He'd worked with Danny too, back in the early days, and though he'd never known the full extent of the man's courage, he remembered his easy smile, the way he'd always have a joke ready to diffuse a tense moment. "Boss," Jack said quietly, breaking the silence, "the crowd's getting antsy out there. We need to figure out what's next." Ozzy nodded, but his eyes never left Emily. He stood, his movements slow, deliberate, as if he were carrying the weight of 20 years of regret. "I owe Danny more than a beer," he said, his voice firm now, resolute. "I owe him a hell of a lot more than that, and I'm going to make it right, starting tonight." He looked at Emily, his gaze intense, almost pleading. "Will you come back out there with me? Let me tell them about Danny, about who he was. The world needs to know." Emily's heart raced, the idea of standing in front of 25,000 people terrifying, but something in Ozzy's voice, a mix of determination and desperation, made her nod. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "For Danny." Ozzy reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "Thank you," he said, and for the first time that night, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. He turned to Jack, his stage persona starting to creep back in, though it was tempered by something deeper, something real. "Get the band ready, we're going back out, and we're gonna do this right." Jack nodded, opening the door and barking orders into his headset. Emily stood, smoothing the leather jacket, her fingers lingering on the badge. She didn't know what was coming next, but she felt a strange sense of purpose, as if Danny's memory was guiding her forward. Ozzy led the way, his boots echoing on the concrete floor, and Emily followed, the jacket feeling lighter now, like it was carrying her instead of weighing her down. As they moved toward the stage, the roar of the crowd grew louder, a reminder of the world waiting beyond the door. For Ozzy, it was a chance to right a wrong, to honor a friend he'd lost too soon. For Emily, it was a chance to keep her brother's memory alive, to let the world see the man behind the badge. The stage lights loomed ahead, and with every step, The past and present collided, setting the stage for a moment that would change them both forever. The roar of the Chicago arena surged like a living thing as Ozzy Osbourne strode back onto the stage, his silhouette cutting through the haze of smoke and spotlights. The crowd of 25,000 had been restless during the unexpected break, their murmurs of confusion giving way to a thunderous cheer as the Prince of Darkness reappeared. But this time, he wasn't alone. Emily Harper walked beside him, her steps hesitant, the worn leather jacket draped over her shoulders, its skull and crossbones badge catching the light like a beacon. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the crowd, her hands trembling as she gripped the edges of the jacket. Danny's jacket, her brother's last tangible piece in this world. Ozzy's presence was electric, his black leather pants and tattered shirt shimmering under the stage lights, but his face carried a weight the audience hadn't seen before, a mix of resolve and vulnerability that hushed the arena into an expectant silence. The band, Tommy on drums, Mick on guitar, and Chris on bass, stood ready, their instruments poised, their eyes darting between Ozzy and the stranger beside him. No one, not the band, not the crew, not the fans, knew what was coming next, but the air crackled with anticipation, as if the entire arena sensed that something profound was about to unfold. Ozzy stepped up to the microphone, his rings glinting as he raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his Birmingham accent rough but steady, "tonight's not just about the music. It's about someone who made the music possible. Someone you never got to know, but someone who meant the world to me and this band. I need you to listen, because this is real, and it's important." The crowd fell silent, a rare moment for a rock concert. Their attention locked on Ozzy as he turned to Emily, his hand gently guiding her to stand closer to the mic. Emily's knees felt like they might give out, the sea of faces stretching out before her like an endless ocean, their eyes curious, some confused, others already softening with empathy. She wasn't used to this, being seen, being the center of anything. For years, she'd lived in the shadow of her grief, keeping Danny's memory close but private, tucked away in the folds of his old jacket. Now, standing on this stage, she felt exposed, raw, but Ozzy's steady presence beside her gave her a flicker of courage. He leaned into the mic again, his voice carrying a weight that silenced even the drunkest fans in the back. "This is Emily Harper," he said, his hand resting on her shoulder. "And that jacket she's wearing? It belonged to a man named Danny Sullivan, one of the best damn roadies Black Sabbath ever had. He was more than a roadie, though. He was a brother, a hero, and tonight we're going to make sure you know his name." The crowd erupted in applause, not fully understanding yet, but caught up in the raw emotion of Ozzy's words. Emily's throat tightened, tears prickling her eyes as she looked out at the faces, some nodding, others raising their fists in solidarity. Ozzy's voice grew stronger, more urgent, as he began to tell Danny's story. "Danny Sullivan was with us in the early days," Ozzy said, pacing the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd as if he could see Danny's face among them. "Back in '73, when Black Sabbath was tearing through America, Danny was the guy who kept us going. He didn't just set up the gear or fix the amps, though he was bloody brilliant at that. He was the one who made us laugh when we were falling apart, who made sure we got on stage even when we were a mess. And one night in Detroit, he saved my life." Ozzy paused, his voice catching, and the crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. The stage was a death trap, some shoddy rigging ready to come down. I was singing Paranoid, jumping around like an idiot. And Danny saw it before anyone else. a lighting truss, right above me, starting to fall. He didn't think twice. He ran across the catwalk, grabbed that thing with his bare hands, and held it long enough for me to get out of the way. It crashed down seconds later, right where I'd been standing. Danny just grinned afterward, said I owed him a beer. The crowd laughed, a warm, knowing sound, but it faded quickly as Ozzy's voice grew heavy. I never got to buy him that beer. Danny died in '75, in a car accident after one of our shows in Memphis. A truck hit him, took him from us, and I've carried that regret ever since. I never told him what he meant to me, to the band, to the music. Emily stood beside Ozzy, tears streaming down her face now, the jacket feeling like a shield and a burden all at once. She hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined that her brother's quiet heroism would be laid bare before thousands of strangers. But as Ozzy spoke, she felt something shift inside her, a weight lifting, as if Danny's memory was finally being set free. The crowd was silent now, many of them veterans of the rock scene themselves, others young fans who'd grown up on Black Sabbath's music, all of them moved by the story of a man who'd given everything for the band they loved. Ozzy turned to Emily, his eyes red but fierce with determination. "This jacket," he said, gesturing to the leather draped over her shoulders, "has Danny's name on it. Literally. Look here." He gently lifted the collar, showing the faded inscription. "If lost, return to Danny Sullivan, Black Sabbath roadie." And the crowd gasped, a collective sound of awe and recognition. "And this badge," Ozzy continued, pointing to the skull and crossbones. "Danny made it himself, back when we were all young and stupid, thinking we were invincible. He wasn't just a roadie. He was part of us. Part of this." Ozzy spread his arms, encompassing the stage, the band, the crowd, the music itself. The audience erupted again, their applause louder now, tinged with something deeper: respect, gratitude, a shared sense of loss. Emily wiped her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, but the weight of the moment was overwhelming. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces reflecting her own emotions, some crying, others nodding, a few raising lighters in tribute, their flames flickering like stars in the darkened arena. Ozzy leaned into the mic, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "Tonight, we're gonna honor Danny the best way I know how. We're gonna play Paranoid, the song he saved me for, and I want you all to sing it with me. For him, for Emily, for everyone who's ever been part of this crazy, beautiful thing we call rock and roll." The crowd roared, their voices shaking the arena, and Tommy kicked into the opening beat of Paranoid, the guitars screaming to life as Mick and Chris joined in, the sound raw and powerful. Ozzy grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her closer to the center of the stage, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt like she belonged, like Danny was there with her, his spirit alive in the music. As Ozzy launched into the song, his voice a primal howl, the crowd sang along, their voices merging into a single thunderous chorus. Emily stood beside him, holding the jacket high, the badge catching the light, and the sight brought tears to the eyes of even the toughest metalheads in the audience. Some fans, old enough to have seen Black Sabbath in their prime, began shouting Danny's name, their voices carrying over the music, a spontaneous tribute that sent chills down Emily's spine. She saw a man in the front row, his hair gray and thinning, raise a beer bottle and yell, "To Danny!" Others joined in, their voices weaving into the song, creating a moment that felt sacred, like a communal prayer for a man they'd never met, but now felt they knew. Ozzy poured everything into the performance, his voice cracking with emotion, his eyes locked on Emily as if to say, "This is for him." When the song ended, the crowd's applause was deafening, a 5-minute ovation that shook the arena's rafters. Emily stood there, tears streaming down her face, the jacket still raised, and for the first time in years, she felt like Danny wasn't just a memory, but a presence, alive in the hearts of everyone in that room. Ozzy stepped back to the mic, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his brow. "Danny Sullivan," he said, his voice hoarse but strong, "you're not forgotten. Not tonight. Not ever." He turned to Emily, his hand on her shoulder again, and whispered something only she could hear. "I'm gonna make this right. For him. I promise." Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak, but her eyes said everything. She believed him. The crowd was still cheering, some chanting Danny's name, others clapping in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Ozzy raised a hand, quieting them once more. "We've got more songs to play," he said, a grin breaking through the emotion. "But tonight, every note is for Danny, for Emily, for all of you who've kept this music alive. Let's make it loud." The band launched into Iron Man, the riff shaking the arena, and Emily stepped back, still clutching the jacket, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. As she watched Ozzy command the stage, she knew this wasn't the end of Danny's story. It was a new chapter, one that would carry his memory far beyond this night. Ozzy's promise lingered in her mind, a vow to do something more, something lasting. And as the music roared on, she felt a spark of hope that whatever came next would honor her brother in a way he deserved. The stage lights burned bright, and for a moment, it felt like Danny was there, smiling, his badge shining in the glow. The Chicago night was cool and quiet outside the arena, a stark contrast to the chaos of the concert that had just ended. The streets were alive with fans spilling out into the city, their voices buzzing with the energy of the show, some still chanting Danny Sullivan's name as they clutched their tour shirts and lighters. Inside a small, dimly lit diner a few blocks away, Ozzy Osbourne and Emily Harper sat across from each other in a worn vinyl booth, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the jukebox played old rock tunes on a loop. The leather jacket, Danny's jacket, rested on the seat beside Emily, its skull and crossbones badge catching the faint glow of the neon sign outside. Ozzy, stripped of his stage persona, looked almost ordinary in a black hoodie and jeans, his hair still damp from the show, his eyes tired but bright with a purpose that hadn't been there before. Emily sipped her coffee, her hands steadier now, though her heart still carried the weight of the night's events. The diner was nearly empty, just a lone waitress wiping down the counter and a trucker in the corner nursing a plate of fries. The jukebox hummed with a soft rendition of Sweet Home Alabama, and for a moment the world felt small, intimate, a far cry from the 25,000 screaming fans they'd left behind. Ozzy leaned forward, his hands wrapped around a mug, his voice low and earnest. "I meant what I said out there, Emily," he began, his Birmingham accent softened by exhaustion. "Danny deserves more than one night. I've been carrying him with me for years, that guilt, that regret. Tonight, seeing you, that jacket, it's like he was giving me a chance to make it right." Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She'd spent 2 decades keeping Danny's memory locked away, wearing his jacket to concerts as a private ritual, a way to hold on to the brother who'd been her hero. But tonight, on that stage, with Ozzy's voice and the crowd's cheers, she'd felt Danny come alive again, not just for her, but for thousands of strangers. It was overwhelming, humbling, and it had cracked open something inside her, a longing to do more, to make sure Danny's life meant something beyond her own grief. "What do you mean?" Make it right?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. Ozzy took a deep breath, his fingers tapping the mug in a restless rhythm. "Danny wasn't just a roadie," he said. "He was the heart of what we did. He kept us going, kept me going, and I'm not the only one who owes him. There are thousands of people out there, roadies, stagehands, crew, who work their asses off to make shows like tonight happen, and they never get the spotlight. They're the ones who carry the weight, and when they're gone, no one remembers. I want to change that. For Danny." Emily's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. "What are you thinking?" she asked, leaning forward, the jacket brushing against her arm as if urging her to listen. Ozzy's voice grew stronger, more resolute. "I'm starting a foundation, the Danny Sullivan Foundation. It'll be for the unsung heroes of this business, roadies, techs, the people who make the music happen, but never get the credit. We'll help them with medical bills, mental health support, anything they need to keep going. Too many of them end up like Danny, gone too soon, with no one to catch them when they fall. I've got the money, the name, the platform. I can make this happen, but I need you with me." Emily's breath caught, the weight of his words settling over her. She'd spent years scraping by, working odd jobs as a bartender and a delivery driver, always carrying the pain of Danny's loss in silence. The idea of turning that pain into something meaningful, something that could help others, felt like a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. "Me?" she said, her voice trembling. "Ozzy, I'm nobody. I'm just Danny's sister. I don't know anything about foundations or music or—" Ozzy cut her off, his hand slamming lightly on the table, his eyes fierce. "You're not nobody. You're the one who kept Danny's memory alive all these years. You wore that jacket, carried his badge. You're the one who showed up tonight, and you're the one he'd want by my side for this. You knew him better than anyone. You're his voice now." Emily looked down at the jacket, her fingers tracing the faded inscription on the collar. "If lost, return to Danny Sullivan, Black Sabbath roadie." She thought of Danny's laugh, the way he'd come home from tours with stories that made her dream of a bigger world, the way he'd always promised to take her to a Black Sabbath show one day. He never got the chance. But tonight, in a way, he had. She felt tears prick her eyes again, but they weren't just grief now. They were gratitude, purpose, a sense that maybe she could carry Danny's light forward. "Okay," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I'm in, for Danny." Ozzy's face broke into a grin, the kind of wild, infectious smile that had made him a legend, and he reached across the table, clasping her hand. "That's my girl," he said. "We're going to do this right. We'll start with you. Whatever you need, the foundation's got you. Medical, rent, therapy, anything. Danny's family is my family now." Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak, but the warmth of Ozzy's hand grounded her, made her feel like she wasn't alone in this anymore. They spent the next hour in that diner talking about Danny, about the foundation, about the countless people like him who deserved better. Ozzy told stories Emily had never heard, how Danny once fixed a blown speaker mid-show with nothing but a screwdriver and a pack of gum, how he'd stay up all night rigging lights so the band could sleep, how he'd always have a kind word for a struggling crew member. Emily shared her own memories, Danny teaching her to play air guitar to Iron Man, sneaking her into a local bar to hear a cover band, promising her that one day she'd see the real thing. As they talked, the jukebox switched to Changes, one of Black Sabbath's softer songs, and Ozzy laughed, a bittersweet sound. "Danny loved this one," he said. "Said it reminded him of home, of you." Emily smiled through her tears, feeling closer to her brother than she had in years. The conversation turned to the future, to how the foundation would work. Ozzy was already planning, reaching out to his manager, lining up donors, setting up a fund for crew members with injuries or PTSD. Emily offered to help with outreach, to connect with other roadies' families, to make sure no one felt forgotten. It wasn't just about Danny anymore. It was about everyone who'd given their heart to the music and been left behind. As the night wore on, the diner grew quieter, the jukebox looping back to older tunes, and Ozzy and Emily found themselves reflecting on what the night had meant. "You know," Ozzy said, leaning back in the booth, "I've spent my life singing about pain, about darkness, but tonight was different. Standing on that stage with you, telling Danny's story, it felt like I was finally doing something that mattered, something bigger than me." Emily nodded, her fingers brushing the badge on the jacket. "I've been carrying him with me for so long," she said, "but tonight, it was like he was carrying me, like he was up there, watching, proud. I haven't felt that in years." Ozzy's eyes softened, and he reached for his coffee, his voice quiet but certain. "He was there. Emily, I felt him too. And he's gonna be with us every step of this foundation. We're not just keeping his memory alive, we're giving him a legacy." Emily smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't felt since she was a kid, listening to Danny's stories. "A legacy," she repeated, the word feeling like a promise, a vow to keep fighting for something good. When they finally left the diner, the sky was starting to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping over Chicago's skyline. Ozzy walked Emily to her car, the jacket slung over her shoulder, the badge catching the early morning light. "We'll start tomorrow," he said, his voice full of determination. "I'll call my people, get the ball rolling. You're gonna be a big part of this, Emily. Danny's gonna be a big part of this." She nodded, her heart full, and for the first time in years, she felt like she had a purpose beyond surviving. As she drove away, the city waking up around her, she glanced at the jacket in the passenger seat, the badge glinting like a star. She could almost hear Danny's voice, his laugh, telling her to keep going, to make him proud. And she would. The Danny Sullivan Foundation would be more than a tribute. It would be a lifeline for those who'd been overlooked, a way to honor the unsung heroes who made the music possible. For Ozzy, it was a chance to heal a wound he'd carried for decades, to turn regret into action. For Emily, it was a way to keep her brother alive, not just in her heart, but in the world. As the sun rose, she felt a quiet strength settle over her, a certainty that Danny's story wasn't over. It was just beginning, carried forward by the music, the jacket, and the promise they'd made to never let him be forgotten.